What if the last $5 in your pocket became the reason your entire life changed by sunrise? The rain drifted steadily across the streets of downtown Columbus, Ohio, turning the sidewalks into shimmering ribbons beneath the glow of old streetlights. Most people hurried past with their collars raised and their eyes fixed ahead, too busy to notice anyone else's struggles. Ethan Brooks wasn't most people. At 39, he had learned that kindness wasn't something you gave when life was easy. It was something you chose when life gave you every reason not to. His faded work jacket still carried the scent of machine oil from another 10-hour shift maintaining equipment at Whitmore Industrial Solutions. The paycheck barely covered rent for the small apartment he shared with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Every dollar mattered. Every gallon of gas mattered. Every loaf of bread mattered. He reached into his pocket as he left the bus stop and counted the money one more time. A single $5 bill. That was all he had until payday. It was supposed to buy breakfast before school for Lily the next morning. She loved blueberry muffins from the little bakery around the corner, and he had promised her they would finally stop there after weeks of saying, maybe next Friday. Promises meant everything to Ethan because too many had already been broken by life. The cold wind swept through the station entrance as he adjusted the backpack, holding Lily's library books. Then he noticed someone sitting alone on a weathered bench near the ticket machines. A woman in a simple gray coat stared silently at the wet pavement. Her shoulders trembled slightly. She wasn't asking anyone for money. She wasn't speaking. She simply looked like someone carrying more weight than one person should ever have to bear. People walked past without slowing down. Some glanced at her for barely a second before disappearing into the evening crowd. Ethan stopped. He hesitated for only a heartbeat before walking toward her. "Ma'am," he said gently, careful not to startle her. "Are you okay?" She looked up. Her blue eyes were red from crying, but there was quiet dignity in the way she met his gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've just had a very long day." Ethan smiled softly. Sometimes that's enough to make the world feel impossible. She managed the smallest smile before lowering her eyes again. Ethan looked at the $5 bill in his hand. He thought about Lily. He thought about breakfast. He thought about tomorrow. Then, without another word, he placed the folded bill beside her. The woman blinked in surprise. "No," she said quickly. "I can't take that." Ethan shook his head. "You need it more than I do. But you don't even know me." His answer came without hesitation. "I don't have to." The sounds of buses pulling away echoed through the station while rain tapped softly against the metal roof overhead. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she accepted the small bill with trembling fingers. Tears gathered again in her eyes, but this time they carried something different. "Hope, may I at least know your name?" she asked quietly. Ethan adjusted the strap on his backpack and smiled the same calm smile that had carried him through every difficult season of his life. "I'm just a dad trying to do the right thing." She watched him disappear into the rain, never imagining that less than 12 hours later, the entire company where Ethan worked would fall silent the moment she stepped onto the stage as their new CEO. The next morning arrived with clear skies that made the previous night's rain feel almost imaginary, but Ethan Brooks still smiled as he watched Lily swing her backpack over her shoulders before school. Instead of the promised blueberry muffin, he poured the last of the cereal into 2 bowls and apologized with quiet regret. Lily looked at him with the wisdom only kind children seem to possess. "It is okay, Daddy. We can get muffins another day." Ethan reached across the small kitchen table and squeezed her hand. "I promise." She smiled. "You always keep your promises." Those simple words stayed with him all the way to Whitmore Industrial Solutions. The sprawling manufacturing campus was already alive with the familiar sounds of delivery trucks, humming machinery, and employees gathering near the main entrance. Something felt different. Luxury sedans lined the front parking lot. Security staff stood straighter than usual. Conversations filled the lobby in hurried whispers. "The new chief executive officer is finally here. I heard she turned around 3 companies in less than 5 years. Someone said she bought a struggling manufacturer and doubled its value." Ethan quietly nodded to the receptionist before heading toward the maintenance office. He preferred staying invisible. He checked equipment reports, grabbed his worn toolbox, and started his morning inspection like every other day. As he tightened a loose valve in the mechanical room, his supervisor called over the radio. "Ethan, everyone to the auditorium." Mandatory company meeting. Within minutes, nearly 300 employees filled the spacious room. Bright lights reflected across polished floors while a large company banner stretched behind the stage. Managers occupied the front rows. Maintenance workers and warehouse employees stood toward the back. Ethan found his usual place near the wall, hoping not to be noticed. A pair of coworkers exchanged amused glances. "Think the new boss even knows we exist?" one joked. Another laughed softly. "She probably has never spoken to someone carrying a wrench." Ethan only smiled politely. He had long ago discovered that silence often carried more dignity than clever replies. The room suddenly grew still as the chairman stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "please join me in welcoming the new Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Industrial Solutions." Every eye turned toward the entrance. The woman who walked through the side doors wore a tailored navy business suit, her posture calm and confident, her expression composed yet thoughtful. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. It was the same woman from the train station, Claire Whitmore, the woman whose tears had disappeared into the rain only hours before, the woman who had accepted his last $5 with trembling hands. She stepped onto the stage and looked across the crowd. For a brief moment her eyes stopped on Ethan. Recognition flashed between them, unmistakable and immediate. Ethan expected surprise, perhaps even a smile. Instead, Claire continued her introduction without acknowledging him. "Good morning," she began with quiet confidence. "I believe great companies are built by people whose character is stronger than their job titles." Ethan lowered his eyes, uncertain what to think. Had she chosen not to recognize him? Had the kindness they shared already faded into memory? Across the auditorium, Claire continued speaking with remarkable composure, but deep inside she knew exactly where the quiet maintenance technician was standing, and she had already decided that before anyone learned who she truly was, she intended to discover who Ethan Brooks really was when no one believed anyone important was watching. By lunchtime, the excitement surrounding the new chief executive officer had spread through every hallway, break room, and production floor, but Ethan Brooks returned to his routine as though nothing extraordinary had happened. He inspected conveyor belts, replaced worn filters, tightened loose fittings, and greeted every employee with the same quiet smile he had worn long before anyone knew Claire Whitmore's name. He never mentioned the train station. He never mentioned the $5. In his mind, kindness was never a transaction waiting to be collected. It was simply the right thing to do. Not everyone shared that view. Near the maintenance shop, two supervisors laughed while watching executives escort Claire through the building. "Look at that," one of them said. "The new chief executive officer probably has meetings worth more than our annual salaries." Another glanced toward Ethan. "Maybe she will promote the maintenance guy next." Stranger things have happened. A few nearby employees chuckled. Ethan only shrugged and continued organizing his tools. "Someone has to keep the machines running," he replied calmly. His answer ended the conversation far more effectively than an argument ever could. Meanwhile, Claire walked through every department without rushing. She listened more than she spoke. She asked operators how long repairs usually took. She thanked warehouse workers for their efforts. She stopped to learn the names of receptionists, janitors, and security guards. Most executives expected reports. Claire wanted people. From across the production floor, she noticed Ethan kneeling beside an aging hydraulic unit. A young technician stood nearby looking embarrassed after installing the wrong replacement part. "I am sorry," the technician admitted. "I slowed everything down." Ethan smiled without frustration. "Everyone learns somewhere. Let us fix it together." Instead of taking over, he patiently explained each step, allowing the younger employee to finish the repair himself. When the machine started smoothly again, the technician's face lit up with relief. Ethan quietly picked up his toolbox and walked away before anyone could thank him. Claire watched the entire exchange from behind a row of support columns. She had expected competence. What surprised her was his generosity. He never tried to make himself look smarter. He made other people feel capable. Later that afternoon, another small moment caught her attention. An elderly custodian struggled to push a supply cart over a damaged section of flooring. Several employees walked around her without noticing. Ethan immediately crossed the hallway, lifted the heavy boxes onto another cart, repaired the loose wheel with a wrench from his belt, and wished her a wonderful afternoon. The woman smiled with grateful eyes. "You always seem to appear at the right time, Ethan." He laughed softly. I just happened to be nearby. Claire lowered the tablet she had been holding. She knew that answer was not true. Kind people did not simply happen to be nearby. They paid attention while everyone else hurried past. As evening settled outside the factory windows and golden sunlight stretched across the polished concrete floors, Claire stood alone in her office overlooking the campus below. Ethan walked toward the employee parking lot carrying the same worn backpack from the night before. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance, yet there was something deeply remarkable about the life he quietly lived. Claire looked at the framed mission statement hanging on her office wall. It spoke about integrity, leadership, and respect. For the first time since accepting the position, she wondered if the company had already been led by its finest example all along, and that example was the man who believed no one important was watching. The following week unfolded with the quiet rhythm of ordinary work, but Claire Whitmore had already begun noticing the moments no report would ever capture. She never announced her observations. She simply walked the factory floor at different hours, sometimes before sunrise, sometimes just before employees headed home. The executives believed she was studying production numbers. In truth, she was studying character. One chilly morning, she paused outside the employee entrance as a young intern struggled to carry 2 oversized boxes while balancing a cup of coffee. Several people hurried past without slowing down. Ethan Brooks set down his own toolbox, took the heavier box with one hand, steadied the coffee with the other, and smiled. First week, the young man nodded nervously. I do not want to make a bad impression. Ethan chuckled softly. The best impression is showing up willing to learn. He walked the boxes inside, wished the intern good luck, and quietly returned to his own work without waiting for thanks. Claire watched from across the lobby, saying nothing. Later that afternoon, another small test arrived without anyone realizing it. A receptionist accidentally dropped an entire stack of client folders just minutes before an important meeting. Papers scattered across the polished floor as panic filled her face. Ethan happened to be passing by with replacement air filters. He immediately knelt beside her, carefully sorted every document in order, and handed them back with a reassuring smile. Everyone has days like this, he said. Do not let one mistake decide the rest of your day. The receptionist thanked him with tearful eyes. Ethan simply nodded and continued down the hallway. He never looked around to see if anyone had noticed. Claire had. The more she observed him, the more one question stayed with her. Was the kindness she had experienced at the train station a single extraordinary moment? Or was it simply the way Ethan chose to live every day? By Friday, she already knew the answer. As employees prepared to leave for the weekend, a delivery driver stood outside staring at a flat tire on his aging truck. Rain clouds gathered overhead, and the driver sighed as he searched unsuccessfully for a jack handle. Ethan, already exhausted after another full shift, walked over without hesitation. Let us take a look. Within minutes, he found the missing tool tucked beneath a storage compartment, helped secure the spare tire, and even shared the sandwich he had packed for dinner because the driver admitted he had skipped lunch to stay on schedule. You should keep your meal, the driver protested. Ethan smiled. My daughter says food tastes better when it is shared. Claire had witnessed everything through the second-floor conference room window. She slowly closed the folder in front of her. The financial reports listed profits, costs, assets, and liabilities, but nowhere did they measure the value of a man who quietly made every life around him a little lighter. She finally understood that the $5 she accepted had never been about the money. They had been evidence of a heart that remained generous even when life offered very little in return. And for the first time since taking over the company, Claire began planning something far more important than restructuring the business. She intended to discover why a man with so much integrity had remained hidden in the background for so many years. Monday morning began like any other, with the steady hum of machinery echoing across the production floor and sunlight spilling through the tall factory windows. Employees settled into familiar routines, unaware that before the day was over, the company would face its most difficult test in years. Ethan Brooks was halfway through his preventive maintenance checklist when every conveyor belt on the main assembly line slowed to an unexpected stop. Warning lights flashed across multiple control panels. Motors fell silent one after another. Within seconds, an entire section of production stood completely still. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the noise that had filled the building only moments before. Supervisors rushed toward the control room. Department managers gathered around computer monitors while anxious conversations filled the air. Every minute the line remained down meant delayed shipments, missed deadlines, and thousands of dollars in lost production. Suggestions came from every direction, but none solved the problem. One manager insisted the software had failed. Another blamed aging equipment. A third recommended shutting down the entire system until outside specialists could arrive the following morning. Voices grew louder. Confidence quietly disappeared. Ethan walked into the control room carrying his worn toolbox, but stopped near the doorway instead of forcing his way forward. He listened carefully. Years of experience had taught him that machines often revealed their problems long before people noticed them. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, remembering a faint vibration he had felt during his inspection earlier that morning. It had seemed insignificant then. Now it suddenly made perfect sense. Without interrupting anyone, Ethan followed the sound of an emergency cooling fan toward the rear mechanical corridor. Dust floated through narrow beams of light as he inspected a series of utility cabinets hidden behind the production floor. After several careful checks, he found a small pressure sensor sending inconsistent readings to the central control system. The component itself had not completely failed. It had simply drifted out of calibration, causing automated safety protocols to stop every connected conveyor. Ethan quietly adjusted the sensor, verified each reading twice, and restarted the sequence according to company procedure. One by one, indicator lights returned to green. Moments later, the conveyors began moving smoothly again. Across the factory, employees looked around in surprise as production resumed almost effortlessly. Inside the control room, managers celebrated the unexpected recovery. "Excellent work," one executive said to the engineering team, assuming they had solved the crisis together. Several people congratulated one another. No one realized Ethan had already returned his tools to the maintenance cart and resumed replacing air filters in another building. From the second-floor observation window, Claire Whitmore had watched every step. She had seen him enter quietly, study the situation without panic, solve the problem without seeking attention, and leave before anyone thought to thank him. She noticed something even more remarkable than his technical skill. He had not corrected the managers who accepted credit they had not earned. He had protected their dignity as carefully as he had protected the company itself. Claire rested her hand against the cool glass and smiled to herself. The man who had given away his last $5 had just saved the entire production line, and once again he asked for absolutely nothing in return. The factory slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, but something had changed inside Claire Whitmore. The production reports on her desk no longer held her attention the way they had during her first week. Profit margins, expansion plans, and quarterly forecasts were still important, yet one question refused to leave her mind. Who was Ethan Brooks before life placed a toolbox in his hands? Late that afternoon, she asked the Human Resources Director to send over his employment file. It was a routine request, one no one questioned. She expected a brief record showing years of maintenance experience and dependable performance reviews. Instead, she found herself sitting in complete silence as page after page revealed a story no one in the company seemed to know. Ethan had graduated near the top of his engineering program almost 15 years earlier. He had accepted a promising position with an industrial design firm and had quickly earned a reputation for solving complex mechanical problems with remarkable creativity. Performance evaluations described him with the same words over and over again: reliable, humble, collaborative, exceptional. Then, almost without explanation, his career path changed. 7 years earlier, he resigned from a leadership position and accepted a maintenance role that paid far less. Claire searched for the reason until she reached a single document attached near the end of the file. Emergency family leave. Spouse diagnosed with a serious illness. Several months later, another note appeared. Bereavement leave approved. Claire slowly closed her eyes. The office around her felt unusually quiet. She understood immediately what those simple words could never fully explain. Ethan had not stepped away from success because he lacked ambition. He had stepped away because someone he loved needed him more than any career ever could. Curious but respectful, Claire asked only one additional question. Who picks up his daughter after school? The Human Resources Director smiled gently. He does every single day. He has never missed a pickup unless Lily was already home sick. Everyone knows not to schedule late meetings for him because he always keeps that promise. Claire thanked her and dismissed the conversation. As evening approached, she looked through the wide office windows and noticed Ethan crossing the parking lot with his familiar backpack. Instead of driving home immediately, he stopped at the neighborhood elementary school a few blocks away. From a respectful distance, Claire watched as a little girl with bright blonde hair ran toward him carrying an art project almost as large as she was. Ethan knelt, admired every colorful drawing with complete attention, and laughed at something she proudly explained. He was not distracted by his telephone. He was not checking emails. For those few precious moments, the entire world seemed to consist of one grateful father and one smiling little girl. They walked together toward an aging pickup truck, their hands swinging naturally with each step. Claire remained inside her car long after they disappeared around the corner. The memory of the rainy train station returned with unexpected clarity. The $5 had never been Ethan's greatest sacrifice. His greatest sacrifice had been invisible, made quietly over years through dreams postponed, promotions declined, and opportunities surrendered so that one little girl would never have to wonder whether her father would be there when she needed him. And in that quiet realization, Claire understood she was no longer searching for the company's most valuable employee. She had already found one of the finest human beings she had ever met. The following Thursday, an unexpected company-wide meeting appeared on every employee's schedule. No explanation was given. Rumors spread through every department before the morning coffee had even cooled. Some believed another restructuring was coming. Others whispered that the recent production failure would lead to management changes. Ethan Brooks glanced at the notification on his phone, quietly finished replacing a worn bearing on an assembly unit, wiped his hands on a clean shop towel, and headed toward the auditorium without giving the meeting another thought. The large room filled quickly with engineers, supervisors, warehouse staff, office assistants, and maintenance workers. Conversations echoed beneath the high ceiling until Claire Whitmore stepped onto the stage. The room settled into complete silence. She thanked everyone for welcoming her during her first weeks as chief executive officer before speaking about the values that would shape the company's future. Modern equipment matters, she began calmly. Strong financial results matter. Innovation matters. But none of those things survive without character. Several executives exchanged curious glances. Claire paused, letting the quiet settle over the audience. Over the past several days, I have met many talented people. I have watched employees solve problems, support one another, and work with remarkable dedication. But one person has reminded me of something far greater than professional excellence. She slowly looked across the auditorium until her eyes rested on Ethan standing near the back wall, exactly where he always chose to stand. "Mr. Ethan Brooks, would you please join me on the stage?" A wave of surprised whispers swept across the room. Ethan looked around, convinced she must have meant someone else. His supervisor gently nodded toward the stage. "She is talking to you." Carrying the same quiet expression he wore every day, Ethan walked down the center aisle while hundreds of eyes followed him. Some employees looked confused. Others remembered the jokes they had made only days before. Claire waited until Ethan reached the stage before turning back to the audience. "You know Ethan as one of our maintenance technicians," she said. "I know him as the man who helped a complete stranger without asking her name, her position, or what she could ever give him in return." The room grew perfectly still. Claire continued with gentle sincerity. "The night before I arrived here, I was sitting alone outside a train station after one of the hardest days of my life. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and questioning whether I was prepared to lead this company. Hundreds of people walked past me. One man stopped. Ethan lowered his eyes, suddenly recognizing where her story was leading. Claire smiled warmly. He had only $5 in his pocket. I know because it was the $5 he quietly placed into my hand after I tried to refuse it. He told me I needed it more than he did. He never asked who I was. He never expected anything in return." A deep silence settled across the auditorium. No phones moved. No chairs shifted. Even the heating system seemed quieter. Claire looked at Ethan with genuine gratitude. "Since that evening, I have watched him every day. I have seen him teach without pride, serve without recognition, solve problems without seeking credit, and encourage people without expecting applause. That $5 bill was never the greatest gift he gave me. The greatest gift was reminding me that the strongest foundation any company can build upon is the quiet dignity of people like Ethan Brooks. Across the audience, the same coworkers who had laughed only days before now stood speechless, realizing they had completely misunderstood the man who had quietly earned the respect of the one person whose opinion mattered most. When the meeting finally ended, employees left the auditorium much more quietly than they had entered. Conversations that usually centered on production schedules and weekend plans had been replaced by thoughtful silence. People who had barely noticed Ethan Brooks for years now nodded respectfully as they passed him in the hallway. A few even apologized for careless jokes they had made. Ethan accepted every apology with the same gentle smile. "We all have busy days," he said. "Let us just keep moving forward." He never mentioned the embarrassment they had caused him because he had never carried bitterness in the first place. As the building gradually emptied that evening, Ethan returned to the maintenance shop to put away his tools before driving to pick up Lily. He expected the day to end like any other. Instead, a soft knock came at the open doorway. Claire Whitmore stood there without her executive team, without security, and without the formal confidence she carried in board meetings. She looked simply like the woman he had met outside the train station. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Of course." They walked slowly through the quiet courtyard between the office building and the production plant. The setting sun painted long golden shadows across the brick pathways, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "I hope I did not embarrass you today." Ethan smiled softly. "I was surprised. That is different from embarrassed." Claire looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "I wanted everyone to understand the kind of man they work beside every day." Ethan shook his head gently. "I only did what anyone should do." Claire laughed quietly. "That is exactly what I have learned is not true. Most people walked past me that night." "You stopped." They continued walking toward the employee parking lot. Claire hesitated before asking the question that had stayed with her for days. "Why did you never tell anyone about your engineering background?" Ethan rested his hands in his jacket pockets as he looked toward the fading evening sky. "Because my daughter needed a father more than I needed a title. Life changes. Priorities change. I have never regretted choosing Lily." Claire listened without interrupting. His words carried no trace of self-pity or disappointment. They carried peace. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" she asked. Ethan thought for a long moment. "I wish my wife had lived to watch Lily grow up. I wish my daughter still had her mother. But I have learned that wishing does not change yesterday. Loving the people who are still here changes today." Claire felt her eyes grow warm. She understood then that the quiet strength she admired had not appeared overnight. It had been shaped through years of loss, responsibility, faith, and daily choices that no one else had ever seen. Just then a cheerful voice called from the parking lot. "Daddy." Lily climbed out of the aging pickup truck after her after-school program and ran toward Ethan with a bright smile. Ethan knelt to greet her before introducing her politely. "Lily, this is Miss Whitmore, the new Chief Executive Officer." Lily offered a small wave before holding up a colorful drawing she had made at school. Without hesitation, Claire knelt beside her to admire every carefully drawn flower, rainbow, and smiling sun. Lily beamed with pride. Ethan watched the simple exchange in quiet gratitude, and for the first time since they had met, Claire did not feel like the leader of a company standing beside an employee. She felt like a woman discovering that sometimes the greatest success in life begins with earning the trust of a little family built on love, dignity, and second chances. The weeks that followed brought quiet changes no one could have predicted. Ethan Brooks still arrived before sunrise, carried the same worn toolbox, and greeted every employee with the same gentle smile. Recognition had not changed him because he had never worked for recognition in the first place. What changed was the way everyone else began seeing him. Engineers now sought his advice before making difficult decisions. New employees asked to shadow him during their first weeks because they had heard he was patient and never made anyone feel small. Even senior managers started walking the factory floor more often, remembering Claire Whitmore's words about character becoming the strongest foundation of any successful company. One Friday afternoon, Claire invited Ethan into her office. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows as she placed a folder on the desk between them. "I would like you to become Director of Maintenance and Reliability," she said with a warm smile. This position comes with a larger team, better pay, and the opportunity to help shape the future of this company. Ethan looked at the folder but did not reach for it immediately. Instead, he asked one quiet question. Do you believe I have earned this because of my work, or because of what happened at the train station? Claire answered without hesitation. Your kindness introduced us. Your character earned this opportunity. Ethan smiled, finally opening the folder. Then I would be honored to accept. Months passed, and the culture inside Whitmore Industrial Solutions slowly transformed. Employees began recognizing one another for acts of kindness as often as they celebrated productivity. Mentorship programs expanded. Volunteer projects became part of the company's identity. Claire often reminded her leadership team that respect was not created in conference rooms, but in everyday decisions made when no one expected applause. Outside of work, another friendship quietly grew. Claire occasionally joined Ethan and Lily for simple dinners at a neighborhood diner or Saturday afternoons at the local park. There were no extravagant gifts and no dramatic declarations, only honest conversations, shared laughter, and the comfortable silence that exists between people who genuinely trust one another. Lily quickly grew fond of Claire, always saving a seat beside her at the table and proudly sharing every new drawing from school. One spring afternoon, the three of them stood together at a community charity event sponsored by the company. They announced a new employee assistance fund created to support families facing unexpected hardships, ensuring that no parent would have to choose between caring for loved ones and keeping a job. As the crowd applauded, Ethan quietly glanced toward Claire. She smiled back, remembering the rainy evening outside the train station when one stranger had offered another the last $5 in his pocket. Neither of them could have imagined where that simple act would lead. Some people believe extraordinary lives are changed by extraordinary fortunes, but the truth is often much quieter. Sometimes a life changes because one tired father refuses to walk past someone in pain. Sometimes respect becomes love only after it has first become friendship. And sometimes the greatest investment a person can ever make is not measured in dollars at all, but in compassion freely given when there is no promise of anything in return. That was the legacy Ethan Brooks left inside the company, inside Claire's heart, and inside every person who learned that quiet dignity will always outlast power, wealth, and titles.